Show. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and we are connecting you to what's next in your life. And we're here to remind you that you are important to this world, and we sure are glad to have you along on this episode of the New Bridge Radio Show. We are again excited to be live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our station page. You can check us out on WLTKDB.com. Also, remember if you would like to get in touch with the New Bridge Radio Show, you can email us at the newbridgeradioshow@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. Let us know what you like about the show and let us know if you would like to be our guest on the show. We love connecting with people who have connected to what was next in their life. Tonight on the New Bridge Radio Show, we're pleased to welcome Vanessa Potter from the UK. In 2012, Vanessa was a successful TV producer and the mother of two children. And one morning, she woke up and discovered she was not only blind, but paralyzed as well. Meditation became an integral part of her recovery, and she would later go on a journey of discovery that resulted in science art collaborations with a neuroscientist. She is the author of Finding My Right Mind, One Woman's Experiment to Put Meditation to the Test, and we are very glad to have her. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, I'm thrilled. I'm excited. I found your story intriguing because I don't know if they had this in the UK, but there was a show that used to come on in the 70s called Little House on the Prairie. And the older sister, Mary, on Little House on the Prairie, lost her vision. And I can remember being a little kid, just being terrified of that aspect and just being afraid and telling my mother, "Oh, I'm going to go blind." And for you, you ended up waking up one morning and found um your sight had completely left you. What was that like for you?
Yeah, well, it actually took 3 days for it to go completely. On the first morning, I woke up and I estimated I'd lost about 70%. And that was that's where you know something really big is happening in your life. And so I suppose I had this short period to acclimatize and adjust to what was happening. But it's a slow, shocking experience. It's like being in a horror movie that someone then puts onto, frame by frame, slow moving. And there's this very strange feeling of things happening very fast, but also people talking very slowly. And it's very much like in a movie where you cannot, and there's this disbelief. So we're all in practical organizing mode and trying to find out what was happening, trying to save me, but there's no processing. So there's no acknowledgement. There's no kind of emotional response when that's happening. I was actually fine. It was afterwards when the emotions catch up and the
Mhm.
processing starts that then the horror. I think people often think it's horrifying at the time, and it is, but it's much more horrifying afterwards when the brain slowly starts to go through and acknowledge what's happened.
Mhm. Mhm. And so in the hospital, uh did you feel rather hopeless that you would not recover your sight? Did you think in your mind, this is the way I'm going to be? Or
No,
did you immediately have this I'm going to beat this kind
no,
of?
absolutely not for 1 second.
Mhm.
I think we all come into sort of different categories, different personality traits, and I suppose if to put a label on myself, I'm probably what I would call a fighter. There was absolutely no way. I'm a fixer. I was a TV producer, a very successful TV producer. I fixed things. I spent my life, problem solving, and so I just applied all of that skill set to myself, and that's partly where all these books and these explorations have come from, is from this desire to self-heal, to explore what options were available, to go beyond and above what I needed to do to get better. And everything I have done since that moment of going blind has been absolutely in that vein of sort of striving, I suppose, to be curious, to find out, to learn, and to experiment. Because the more I experimented with getting my vision back, the more it worked. I mean,
Mhm.
I did all sorts of strange things to get my vision back. Things at the time that people looked at me and went, "What are you doing?" But I was
Mhm.
stimulating my visual system. So for example, one of those things, and I write a lot about this in my first book, is I created a visual sanctuary, and this is a made-up place inside my mind. It became called it was called the beach because it was a
Mhm.
beach. And I'd learned these skills in antenatal classes when I was pregnant with my children. So I had this skill set. So this is kind of again where all the meditation came from. You just pick on what you've got. So these are resources, these are skills I've been taught, and I pulled them out and went, right, now how can they help me in this situation? And by visualizing this a beautiful beach, and I could imagine putting my toes under the sand, it's all cool underneath and hot on the top. I could picture the waves, I could picture the colors, birds. So actually what I was doing was two things. One, I was calming my nervous system down because I was also regulating my nervous system by using breathing. So there was a very physiological impact, but there was also uh, a very clever process going on inside my brain, because we don't see with our eyes. The eyes is our lenses. We see with our
Right.
brain, and that's in the visual cortex at the back of your skull. And so I was exercising my visual centers. I was making them still function and work, so I wouldn't suffer from atrophy, so I wouldn't lose those skills. So, yeah, I was a very much a fighter. I found resources and utilized them and exploited them, if you like, to help me in that moment. And that's what I continued on doing, even when I came home with all the self-experimenting on visual tests, on walking tests, all of these things to yeah, help to fight back. Yeah, I'm a
Mhm.
fighter.
Mhm. And it took a total of 2 years for you to recover. Yes?
Yeah, well, it's about a year in total for the well, it's difficult to really surmise this because vision doesn't just switch back on, and it's very
Mhm.
difficult to assess it. That's partly also why I did all these experiments. So it was about a year before I was walking, and I still don't have full vision. I'm partially sighted, but I got as much as I got back after about a year. There was still, because nerves, when they've been damaged, and it was my optic nerves that had been inflamed, they take a long, long time to recover.
Right.
Anyone who's had a pulled ligament will know that, if you've damaged the nerves, it takes months and years sometimes for it to recover.
So, and now at this point, uh, you're sighted enough that you can still function normally. You can drive and do things that you would previously?
Yes, and anybody with an invisible disability will know full well that you have a lot of strategies, and I just have a shed load of strategies. It really helps me when everybody keeps their hair the same. And in winter, they wear the same bubble hat and the same coat. If you start changing your winter outfit, that really throws me. People out of context throws me. I do a lot of recognition through gait, through people's angles, the way they hold their head. Voice is a big one. Um, so yeah, I get by and I function. In fact, my husband forever is saying, I totally forget about you. So for example, if I'm in a busy place, like at a festival or a busy crowd, all those strategies go out the window because nothing is anchored. Everything is constantly fluid and moving. And that for me is visual overload, and I cannot process the information. So to give you an example of that, we were at a festival and my son and my husband went to a van to get a burger, and they
Mhm.
were about 8 feet from me, and I had to stand still, rooted, and I could not see them, could not process them, could not work out where they were. And when they came back, I was racing. I was that cross because they'd forgotten that
Mhm.
I would not be able to see them through the crowd. So yeah, I function most of the time when nobody would know, but then occasionally I do get, unlike in dull light, like I won't go meet, not that anybody meets anybody in restaurants or bars these days with COVID,
Right.
but in the days where I did, we have a signaling where they do crazy mad waving. Otherwise, I will never find them. But we have strategies. You learn to have strategies when you've got a disability.
Exactly. So, tell me a little bit about your desire to study this, to study meditation, because um, after you saw the results that you did in your own healing, you started to wonder about how your mind works, and you kind of came up with a way to do an experiment, but you really needed to meet a neuroscientist, and luckily you did.
Yeah, I think one of my, again, a coping strategy, if you like, was curiosity, was to understand this. And rather than run away from it and be fearful of it, I figured I'd go up close and understand it. And that was just my personal kind of modus operandus to get through all of this. And actually, the brain's really fascinating. And I
Right.
also, I'd spent my life in a visual industry and I didn't know how my visual system worked. And that kind of felt wrong. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time researching, not so much the illness side of things. So, I was diagnosed with an illness called NMOSD, which is a very rare autoimmune neurological illness. I actually spent most of my time, yeah, looking into the brain and the functions of the brain. And I did what I kind of thought anybody would do in my situation with all the experimenting I did. And I documented everything from the first day. I had an MP3 recorder, and my family kept a diary for me for the whole time I was in hospital. So I had all of this data, and I thought, well, there's something here that someone else must be interested in because there's just so much information, and I've learned so much, and I've got it all recorded. So I put together a neuroscience exhibition because I just kind of thought that's what anybody would do. Because only
Right.
afterwards I kind of went, oh, okay, that was just me then. And so I networked and through my because I don't have no science friends. It wasn't an industry I had any connections with, but I networked and I bounced around, and I eventually was put in contact with a couple of people at the Medical Research Centre in Cambridge. And I spoke to a guy there, and he said, right, I know the scientist you should talk to. And that was Tristan Beckenstein. And he was a bit dubious because scientists get approached by the public all the time.
Right.
And a lot of patients are often, not surprisingly, looking for answers. So they go to the scientists. And of course, they're not clinical practitioners. So they tend to be very polite, but not get involved.
Hmm.
And I bugged him. I stalked him completely. And I sent him my exhibition. And he was like, who is this crazy woman? And so he very politely gave me a 5 minute, or it might have been a 10-minute slot. I remember it was a very short phone slot.
Hmm.
And I called him up and we talked, I think that first time for 2 hours and just connected. And then yeah, I went to Cambridge, met him. He wanted to meet my brain. That is exactly what he said to me. He said, come to Cambridge, I want to meet your brain. And then we started talking about the exhibition ideas and bouncing things around. And then there was an opportunity for the Cambridge Science Festival, because he's at Cambridge University. Um, they were looking for projects, and he said, well, I've got this crazy woman, but maybe we could do something. She's a producer, so she could probably pull this off.
Hmm.
And so we put together this amazing, and when I look back, I think, oh, what did we do? This is so phenomenal.
Right.
This immersive interactive exhibition that did use meditation. So it invited members of the public to come along and to wear an EEG headset. Now, EEG records your live brain activity through little electrodes that are put on your scalp, and you get these little portable headsets that we can put on. And so we invited people to come in, and we'd made a film so you could hear all about my story, how I'd used meditation to get through the trauma of my sight loss. And we invited them to have a go themselves. So this was to have a little 5 minutes of mindfulness. And most people who came along had never tried mindfulness.
Hmm.
And we sat in a little darkened room and record their brain while they did their mindfulness session. It was through a guided audio session. And after 5 minutes, they came out. And it was funny because they all went into the exhibition giggling. It's all putting
Right.
these funny electrodes on your head. It was all quite exciting. And they came out just like, whoa, like zombies. They were just
Right.
like, wow. And then we showed them these visual animations. So we'd managed to translate the EEG brain frequencies into music and art.
Hmm.
That was a really complex process. I'm really shortcutting that. So they had these animations on a screen that was their brain. There was
Hmm.
this tangible evidence, and what they could see, because we also recorded something called a baseline, which is where they weren't meditating. So this was footage where there was just their brains thinking about shopping lists. And then there
Hmm.
was the footage of them actually, and in some cases, just trying, and what they thought was failing to meditate. And then we showed them side by side. And of course, there were marked differences. And we cleverly color coded it so they could see when their whole system was in a much more calm, kind of more neutral gear, or when it was much more heightened. And it was clear to see that the vast majority of people had a change when they meditated. And that was mind blowing for a lot of people. And our biggest problem with this exhibition was that we couldn't get rid of people. They wouldn't go. Because it was Pandora's box. Once we'd
Hmm.
shown them their brain, they were questions. And they're like, oh my God, can I do it again? Oh my
Mhm.
God, like I've never connected with my brain and myself in this way. And so we'd have to lead them out the door and they'd come back. And
Mhm.
we had 120 sessions and every single one was booked and not a single person didn't show up, which I'm told afterwards was pretty unusual. So whether they were queuing down the road to do it. So it was this incredible exhibition. So yeah, that was our first collaboration, which was a huge success.
You know what I loved about it is I watched the pictures in your TED Talk on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating how you took the alpha and the beta and theta waves and you made them into the colored movies.
Yes.
And people could see their brain activity and thinking they had no, they could never meditate. And all of a sudden they see this marked difference in their brain and they're just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was such a clever experiment, I thought, because I've been studying hypnosis for 3 years now,
Mm.
and you're gently guiding people into a particular brain pattern so that you can give them suggestions. So I thought the whole thing was just brilliant, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that really made a huge impact for some of those people that day.
It did. And for people that weren't expecting that,
Mhm.
because the brain isn't tangible, the mind is not tangible. It's kind of unreal. And also we don't look after it.
Right.
So, a lot of people were making comments like, "Look, I go to the gym, I walk, I careful with what food I eat, I try to not drink too much. And I look after my body, but the mind seems to be this separate thing that nobody applied any kind of health strategy to.
Right.
And for some people, that was quite seriously life changing. I mean, I heard from people afterwards, and it was only 5 minutes. This was
Mhm.
the incredible thing. And yeah, so I loved it, and that was the spark. You think that would have satisfied the curiosity? It did nothing to satisfy it. All it did was ignite it. And
Mhm.
it just, I mean, it was during that exhibition that I had the idea
Mhm.
for the next project, which of course took many, many years to do. But it was having those questions, having those interactions with people, and the curiosity, and just this massive engagement from our audience that made me realize that there was so. I mean, I was just the edge of the top of the iceberg. There was so much more to learn. That
Mhm.
for me, yeah, it was just beginning.
Well, we are going to have to step away for a moment, Vanessa, and we are going to have to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. We will be right back on the New Bridge Radio Show.
A book of mystery, a book of one man's journey, a book of the afterlife, a book you must read. Ghost and Me by five-time award-winning author Kevin Killen is a book of one man's journey in the search of the afterlife. Read of his chilling childhood experience, his investigative journeys, and his opinions of paranormal activity. Ghost and Me by Kevin Killen, an Ozark Mountain publication. Get your copy today online or wherever books are sold.
Back to the New Bridge Radio Show on WLTKDB Let's Talk. I am your host, Kevin Mackey, and tonight we are privileged to have Vanessa Potter, a meditation expert and author, on our show, explaining the brain and how she was able to recover from paralysis and blindness through meditation. Welcome back, Vanessa.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back again.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about the next experiment that you did with Barbara and Tristan. And it was more long term, where you really wanted to collect as much data as you could about how your brain works and about learning and experimenting with different modalities of meditation and how you had to wear a contraption on your head to
Hmm.
collect the data. Tell us about that experiment.
Yeah, so this was the contraption. Let's start with that. Was an EEG headset.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, EEG records your live brain activity. And these days, there are some quite streamlined, small caps. They still look like something from a sci fi movie, but you can wear them fairly discreetly on your head.
Hmm.
And there are five little electrodes, and those will record data, which scientists can then take, collate, and process and start to analyze to see if there are patterns. So, this was a study with Barbara Jacks as part of her PhD, and she was a student at Cambridge University under the supervision of Tristan Beckenstein. And we were looking at and investigating the contents of my mind and looking at the bridge between the contents of my mind and the workings of my mind. So they were looking for patterns and correlations to understand what state of mind a person might be in. And using meditation is a brilliant way to do that. So I tried 12 different modalities. And as somebody who studies hypnosis, you know that hypnosis, a hypnotic trance, is a quite a different state from whether you're just following a mindfulness practice,
Right.
or even if you're doing a visualization practice. I mean, there's crossovers between visualization and hypnosis, but let's say you're doing loving practice or a compassion based practice, then there's quite different parts of the brain that are active. And also we the interface with us is our consciousness is different. So if you're doing a compassion practice, then you are having quite heightened emotion, and that might be negative emotion, that might be you know quite difficult. You might feel quite elevated doing a practice like that, whereas if you're doing hypnosis session, then chances are those levels will be the opposite end. So that's what was interesting to the scientists, is how different all of those things are. And also, let's face it, someone closes their eyes, what's going on inside their head? I mean,
Hmm.
what do we know? And we only really know what we say afterwards. So it was taking that narrative of how do you feel? How was that session afterwards? And breaking it down into really small, detailed questions. So, how emotional were you? How bored were you? How focused were you? How much were you concentrating? How real or made up was this? And we had 12 different questions that we would ask. And then we would split it out between the time segments of the meditation session. So let's say it's 40 minutes or 20 minutes. We would, split it out. And then I would give all this very nuanced, detailed information. And then they could put that on top of the EEG oscillating lines, in the wiggly lines that is created by EEG. And then they could compare the two. And that's where they could start to see correlations and patterns. And so that was the premise of the experiment. And for that, of course, I got to explore 12 extremely different ways to
Yeah.
train my mind. And it's, meditation is not one size fits all. A lot of people think it's just kind of mindfulness. And if anything, my experiment and my book hopefully can educate people and maybe broaden their horizons on actually how radically different they can be, and treat them a little bit prescriptively. You might use one over another for different reasons. So yeah, that was the premise
Exactly.
of the experiment.
Yeah, you started out with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy,
Mm, mm,
MBCT,
yeah.
and it was interesting how that worked. And when you first started, I think someone mentioned to you, "Oh, meditation is just mindfulness," and so you started there with that, and the knowledge you gained from MBCT was quite a lot.
Yeah, that was a big steep learning curve.
Mhm,
Because I'd done visualizations mainly, and
mhm,
I'd never actually formally been taught mindfulness. And I realized during that course how little I knew about it, and actually how big a topic it is. And because of the cognitive therapy element, which is brilliant because that's the mechanics, that's the nuts and bolts of the mind, and how we go into autopilot, how the mind can run away with thoughts, and starting to get a different relationship with all of those processes going on, this ability to stand back from it. So mindfulness was a really good foundation block because it pretty much features within all of the practice, not all of them, but it's a heavy contender within all of the different practices. So having that skill, and it is a skill, learning
Mhm.
mindfulness is absolutely a skill. Once you've acquired that and start to get better at it, then that becomes accumulative. And so actually, I learned the sort of nuts and bolts of mindfulness in the MBCT class, but I got better at it with its implementation throughout the other modalities as time, the 3 years went on.
Exactly. I love that part of the book where you with I'm not sure, without knowing, you had kind of built this foundation throughout your experiment from each of the previously studied modalities. And I thought that was like, what was interesting about going along in this journey with you is, having a little bit of meditation training myself. And there were several times in the book I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what that is. That's what that is." And there were things that you talked about that I had never experienced. So one of the other modalities you studied that was interesting in the book was the compassion,
Mm,
or and it had a name in the book. I think it was Meta
yeah,
Bhavana. Bhavana?
yeah. Loving kindness.
Loving kindness. Yes. It struck me because it's not necessarily affirmations that you're doing, but you're cognizant of um, creating compassion not only for yourself but for others around you.
Mm,
Tell us a little bit about that, because that was interesting.
yeah, interesting is the word. Yeah, I was a bit like, a couple of the modalities is like, oh, look, I have to do this, because it's quite a significant area of research. And one of the ones that I rolled my eyes was, yeah, compassion work. Because I was like, oh, I'll just skip through this. It'll be fine. It'll be easy. And one of my psychologist friends kind of looked at me and went, I think you might find it quite hard work.
Mm,
What work? Oh my goodness, she was so right. Compassion was extraordinarily difficult because it has a way of stripping you back, and there's nothing but honesty uh, in a loving kindness practice. And it's so simple. And I was so mistaken to think it was a benign practice. It's not, it's a deeply profound practice. So, just to explain what it is, it has 5 stages. A very traditional loving kindness practice has 5 stages. And you go through these different sections where you just repeat phrases, which is, may I be well, may I be kind, may I be happy. And you start with yourself, and you
mhm,
just say these little phrases to yourself, as you say, affirmations. And after that, then you focus your attention onto somebody that you like, someone you love, a close member of family. And maybe for some people this isn't even a human. Quite often Westerners will choose an animal, a pet, because that's an uncomplicated love.
right.
The idea is it's supposed to be uncomplicated. And then you move on, you go through these different stages, and you focus your attention on someone you're fairly neutral about, and then somebody that you actually have a problem with. But you can't choose somebody that you really don't like, because then you just, it's too much to deal with. But so someone that you've just got to niggle with, someone who you dislike. And then the idea is then you send these affirmations to everybody in the world. So
Mhm.
it seems like a really simple practice, but oh my goodness, there's this stripping back that goes on. And one of the things I found, and this is very common, you start doing it and you go, okay, maybe I be well, maybe I feel not, be happy. And I'm going, okay, I feel nothing. Like
Right.
where is this love? Where is this? And this idea of love as well as has a lot of Westerners, toe curling at this. It's like, oh, it's a very cringy word.
Mhm.
And you have to really get into that and dig down. And I suddenly realized that I had this numbness around me. And I've kind of already known that, but to have this practice really heighten that was soul destroying. I mean, it was just horrendous. And that's a very, very common response to doing loving kindness. And so what happens though is a brilliant thing. You can work on it. You can grow compassion. And this is such an awesome skill. And I think so many of us don't realize we can do this. So you repeat this practice over and over and you get better at it. And what started to happen was that compassion literally is like a seed. I mean, this is why the Buddhists use so many of the kind of growing and seeds, analogies, because it's exactly what happens. That's why they use the word cultivate.
Mhm.
And this kind of um, sense of warmth, sense of loving came bit by bit by bit. And then it's like a bit like it's like a tap that gets turned on. It goes whoosh, and suddenly it was quite overwhelming. But it was an amazing practice to do, and that really opened my eyes and actually then informed and fed into many of the practices afterwards. It was a significant practice, let's say, and it's kind of about two-thirds the way through the book. So I'm glad I did it early on and not right at the end of the experiment,
Mhm.
because I got the benefits. And it's one of the practices that I continue with. It's something that is present and part of my life and has to be part of my life, um, in every single sort of fraction of my life. It's so important, is compassion. It's the backbone of our existence.
Exactly. You even mentioned that you would be walking in public and just kind of saying these affirmations under your breath. And if you found somebody you disagreed with, were disagreeable off the bat, you just zomp them with a bit of
Yeah,
compassion.
compassion is a great thing because what it does, one of the things that you start to realize is that there is no singular reality. And this is
Mhm.
one of the kind of the clangers, if you like, of a meditation practice. There are all these things, they kind of drip, drip, drip into your consciousness, and you have these kind of realizations. And it sounds really obvious, but if you've never really sat and thought about it, that your view of the world is only just one of millions, it really helps. It takes the pressure off. So if you've got a disagreement or you don't see eye to eye with someone else, understanding, if only you understand that you are both human and that they just have their reality and their reality is as strong and as attached to them as yours is to you, that really helps. It gives
Exactly.
you this ability, if you like, a license to be able to stand back from the whole thing. And that was one of the clinches for me with compassion practice, was this acknowledgement and acceptance and being totally okay with the fact that there are different realities out there. If you think about all the problems that we have in the world, if you can get to a state where people just accept, I mean, that whole phrase, agree to disagree, if you like, if we can just genuinely accept that, then we probably have a lot less problems than we do.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, in one of the modalities, it was interesting because there was a young woman and I can't remember which one it was, Vanessa. But there was a woman who had an issue with a guy. I think she was a nurse, and she was dealing with a guy who had been a rapist.
Mm.
And your instructor, and she had brought that into the class, and the instructor had said, "Well, that guy isn't here. It's not really him that's causing you the stress. It is your reaction to the stress,
Yeah.
to the guy that is causing you the stress." And that hit me like a profound in such a profound way. Did that hit you as well? It's
Oh
like,
my
oh my
God.
God.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because that was just like, and I mean, you do an experiment like this, and you have like moments where the little light bulb goes,
Right.
bing. I mean, it was flashing with the light bulb at that moment, and I just did this oh moment where I just got it, and unfortunately, in the woman kind of being dumbfounded and not getting it actually really helped me get it, because
Hmm.
she was too close.
Right.
She lived that reaction like, on repeat. It was a Groundhog Day, which is over and over and over, and she couldn't have the separation. And this is a big thing modern practice does. It separates, it gives you that step back where you get this expanded view of actually your life and what's going on, and then you can see the spaces between things, and it's in that space that everything happens. When it's all scrunched up, we don't see it, and that's because when we're too busy and we're too close to stuff. But this, yeah, so that was about attachment. That's Buddhist attachment, where we often believe that we feel the way we do because of other people.
Hmm.
And this is a very commonly held, understanding. And it's constantly reinforced in our lives, in our Western lives. And of course, if you stop and think about it, that's rubbish. You know, your reaction to something is an emotional response, and you have a choice over that.
Hmm.
You absolutely can get into that space when something happens and choose how you respond. And the monks, analogy of going, has that man crawled inside your head and is he pressing a button? And he's not even in this room. So how can he be making you angry? It's your emotional response.
Hmm.
But taking ownership of that is huge. So I had that, clanging moment like you did, but it took me years still of working on it to be able to live it, because it's really counterintuitive. But the second, even if you can start living it a little bit,
Right.
it really helps you not get so cross and wound up in life. It really
It,
takes that edge off things,
it
and you
really
just,
does.
it does, it's a release.
Hmm. Yeah, I have a hard time with people tailgating me when I'm driving. And sometimes my reaction is to fly, I can, I let it get to a point where it's where, it's where I can see where I can't see the person's bumper in my rearview mirror. Then I start getting, why are you doing this? And when I learned that from the book, I'm like, it's just my reaction. It has nothing to do with how
Yeah.
close they are or anything. And I got to admit that that started changing things. And there was also another instance in the book. I think it was when you were studying Zen, where there were two monks that there was a woman who trying to cross the river, and one of
Yeah.
the older monks ended up helping her, lifting her up over the water and carrying her
Hmm.
to the shore. And the younger monk was a little bothered by that he had touched this woman. He had broken a vow in a way, but he had chose the compassionate act, and it was his compassion that overrode the rule. And later on, the younger monk was asking him about that. Well, why would you break your vow? And he's like, well, I think we left the woman on the shore a long time ago.
But you're still carrying her.
But you're still carrying her. Exactly.
I love that story. Do you know why I love that story? There's a great message, and this is absolute classic Zen.
Mhm.
Zen is, there's a message, and there's a message within the message, and then there's another message. And when you stand back, you look back, and there's no message.
Mhm.
Zen is just so wonderfully funny and playful and provocative, and the stories are so utterly clever, and they are so appropriate even for modern times. I love that story because there are no rules.
Mhm.
And I think we get so bound up and tied up. And even if I listen to a meditation track now, and I often follow guided tracks, uh, they start with how you must sit and what you must do. And I'm like, "Ooh." I really have learned through all of this that you will find your own way about what suits you. And there are so many rigid rules. And of course,
Mhm.
there are guidelines. Of course, there are guidelines, and there are, certain techniques and ways of doing things. I totally acknowledge that. But there are no rules. And this is such an important thing to understand with your own mind. You make up the rules. And
Right.
so I love that, yeah, that compassion overrode the vows, which are supposed to be impenetrable. And yet, there you go.
Mhm. Mhm. The other study that I found interesting was the yoga, the Kundalini yoga.
Mm.
And in the book, it was kind of hard going on that journey because this was something so arduous at first. Was that your least favorite modality?
No, it was the most challenging in some respects. I mean, there were different challenges. I mean, Vipassana was probably the most grueling.
Mhm.
That's the right word to use, because of the isolation and the 10 hours of meditation a day. I mean, that's pretty full on. Kundalini yoga was the most physically challenging.
Mhm.
And what was really interesting about that is the stories we tell ourselves. So one of the first practices that I did with, and I was very lucky, I had a teacher who taught me one-on-one, and she actually came to my house for the very first one, and she had me do a very difficult holding pose, which I had to hold my arms out in front of me for 12 minutes.
Mhm.
And you've got that whole thing with the inner narrative. I'm sitting there with my eyes closed, my arms out the front, but there's like so much going on inside my head. And it was just staring agony and bleeping alarms and my brain going, you can't do this. It's awful. There's just this angry voice inside my head saying, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And it hurts. And it's really interesting because this is where you learn again to have a different relationship with yourself. And also pain is just it's a brain signal.
Mhm.
So I'd go to that pain signal in my back and I, got curious about it and sort of sat with it and, really pinpoint, put my attention onto it, my, sharp focus on it. And it would go. And that was just like the most remarkable thing. And then the second I went, oh, that's really cool. It's gone. Boom, it would come back again. So I was then playing with it. So it was very physically challenging. And it really allowed me to have a different relationship with those voices, if you like, the kind of the mind chatter,
Mhm.
particularly mind chatter where it goes, you can't do that. No, I don't want to do that. And that was really interesting because there are barriers and boundaries that I could go through. And that was such a learning curve for me. And so yeah, there was a lot going on inside the Kundalini practice, so I actually came to really enjoy it and I got a lot out of it. And in fact the data um, started to show that I kind of was a bit oh, it's physically difficult, but it is hugely rewarding. And also Kundalini is very prescriptive, so you use kriyas. So anyone who doesn't know about Kundalini yoga, the poses, the movement that you go
Mhm.
into are called kriyas, and there are sets of kriyas, and you can use them for different things. So whether you're flushing out your lymph nodes, whether you want something that's to do with feeling very negative, you can prescribe one set of kriyas for a specific problem and then
Mhm.
repeat it, which I really like that. I think it's a very practical practice.
Now, you also learned in one of the modalities a mantra
Mm.
and how to meditate with a mantra. And in the book, I like how you described it, that it helped reel you in and it helped to guide your thoughts and it became like a friend, your mantra. And sometimes in the other modalities, your mantra would show up. Tell
It
us
was
about,
sneaky.
right, tell us about the mantra.
So there were two practices that use a mantra. Transcendental meditation is a very well-known practice, and that's just a one word that you're given. And also the other one was the Christian meditation, which not that many people have heard of, which
Mhm.
again is it's a four-syllable Maranatha, and that's the same mantra that's given to everybody. And they're used in slightly different ways, but a mantra, in essence, is one word that is repeated over and over. And that is it. But and again, you think ridiculously simple, benign, easy, and there is so much to it. And this is the thing about meditation, it's just like layer upon layer upon layer. And I really like a mantra practice. And that again has been something that I've continued with. And transcendental meditation describes itself as effortless, and it is. With mindfulness, there's quite a lot of work involved, to keep the mind. Whereas with a mantra, the idea is kind of just to forget it, and it almost has like a slightly hypnotic, a hypnotizing effect. I would say I probably experienced trance at certain stages doing the mantra practice, and then the word becomes like this kind of reverberation inside your mind, and after a while, it stops even having like consonants or vowels. It's just more of a sensation and like yeah, vibrations throughout the mind. And I would find it moved around as well, which sounds
Mhm.
really weird, but the more you practice these things, the more your relationship with them changes. And I would describe myself as dropping down. So a mantra practice allowed me to um, go very deep
Hmm.
into a meditation very quickly, because you become conditioned. This is another thing that perhaps people don't always think about with meditation. You get better at it,
Right.
and you can't actually be bad at it, but you get more conditioned. So things, you can get to a particular state quicker, and you also learn to be a little bit more forgiving with yourself as time goes on as well. But with a mantra practice, I had deep relaxation, very, very deep relaxation very quickly. And I used to describe it, because it's only 20 minutes as well, as a reset button. I used to do the practice at this particular time. I was picking my children up from school, and I'd do it just before the school run, which is often a bit of a low in the afternoon, about 2:30. And that would be like my reset button had been pressed, and I was back to 000, and I could go on again, and I would have this boost, and I loved it.
Hmm.
It was a really fantastic boost in the middle of my day.
Out of all of the modalities that you experimented with, which one do you think had the most impact on you?
Oh, I do get asked this, and it's really difficult because they all fed into each other. They all do
Hmm.
different things. I mean, big practice was breath work, which was a
Hmm.
surprise, which we're not planning to do. And that was right at the very end, and that was a precursor to doing the psychedelic retreat, and that was something I was exposed to, and that was massive. And in fact, so much so that I'm training to become a breathwork practitioner. And in fact, we're just starting a new study with Tristan, doing a breathwork study. So
Hmm.
that's had a big impact upon my life. Still mindfulness. I mean, I use mindfulness and compassion, and I use meditation prescriptively. So depending on where I am in my life and what I need, I have the resource now, and that's been the beauty of doing this. I know exactly what I can use. And whilst you've got to be careful, you can't necessarily start one practice and mix up lots of other ones. I wouldn't necessarily say do that, but there is flexibility to
Right.
integrate other practices. And I really like doing that because I have become quite experienced in this. I kind of know what works and what's compatible. And also, part of meditation is listening to yourself and listening to your own body and your own needs, and being much more attuned to that. And
Hmm.
so now I can move between what practices I feel my body needs. Sometimes I just think, okay, I've been irritable the last 2 days. I really need a dose of compassion. So I'm going to do compassion for a week, or I might do some gratitude practices or even some joy practices. So I'll do stuff that will just recalibrate that element of myself. Um, the negative mind meditation, for example, through Kundalini yoga, which I love, because that's a really good way to reflect on what's inside your head. Because sometimes it stuff's in your head and you haven't kind of stood back and really looked at it, and that's a
Right.
really good practice for that. So it really depends on what I'm needing at whatever stage in my life.
Hmm. That's what I loved about the book is it gives you so much information about all of these modalities, and your commitment to them was huge.
Mm.
In most of them you were practicing at least twice a day, at least 20 minutes. And tell us a little bit about your in some of these modalities that you were studying, you were a little hesitant to wear your your headset.
Oh my goodness. Well, I wasn't allowed to take it to the Vipassana retreat.
Hmm.
And they were very, yeah, there was just no movement on that.
Hmm.
So all the data that we captured for that, for Vipassana, was done by my practice at home. And yes, when I was being taught a walking meditation really early on, that means going outside with the headset on.
Right.
That was very funny. Me trying to disguise it with silly hats and
Hmm.
try and feel serious. But do you know, there's a really interesting thing there, though. So I'm in my local park with this EEG headset on my head, feeling very self-conscious. I think I ended up with a bobble hat on the top in the end, feeling
Mhm.
just ridiculous, like the whole world must be looking at me. To go and do a walking practice. Now, walking meditation, you kind of look weird because you
Mhm.
walk really slowly, and nobody walks slowly. And and yet, with all of those things, I did the walking practice, and it was just like the world opened up. Even with all that worry, even with the, trying to look out the corner of my eye, and a phone call, I had a phone call in the middle of it as well with from my child's school. But even with all of that, it had this deep impact, and I suddenly saw trees, I saw the outlines of leaves, color was there, and it was because my senses had slowed down. And so it was less about the narrative in my head, it was all about my sensory experience of the world, and that's such a joy when we do that.
Hmm.
So actually I have another project I'm working on at the moment, which is using forest bathing, which is essentially slow walking in nature. And
Hmm.
it often feeds back into that very first time that I did it, where I walked slowly in the park with my silly headset on. And it's just such an amazing thing to do. So even with embarrassing sci-fi headset, it worked. It did the job.
Exactly. And tell us a little bit in the last few minutes that we have. Tell us about the data, how the data has been used.
So the data, there's a lot of data, and that actually at the moment is being processed.
Hmm.
Um, so there will be, hopefully, I mean, the things move very slowly in academia, so there will eventually be a paper. But they're doing cross analysis and comparison analysis now. So we're hoping that something will come of that. What was really interesting, just again from the hypnotherapy point of view, hypnosis is an absolute standalone. I mean, it's just out here.
Hmm.
And so from a scientist perspective, if I was to close my eyes right now and with an EEG headset on and do even just a few minutes of follow a hypnotic track, they would
Hmm.
know straight away that it was hypnosis and not mindfulness and not vipassana and not any of the other techniques. It's absolutely, so that for them is
Exciting.
immediately very, very interesting.
Right. Because now they can say, oh, wait a minute. There really is a way to create a state of
Yes.
productive trance.
And it's identifiable quickly. Yes.
Hmm.
It's got
Hmm.
significant markers that they can see instantly. Yes.
So, in the minutes we have remaining, tell us a little bit about your website and how people can find you.
So they can find me at vanessapotter.com. I'm also on Instagram at Vanessa Potter Writes, and I'm on Twitter as well. So I'm all over the place. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people. And
Hmm.
if anybody gets the book and reads it, I'd love to hear what they thought of it.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to leave a review for you on Amazon because that you're the so first of all, you're a great writer, fantastic
Thank
writer,
you.
and the knowledge that you gain and perspective that I gained from going through these modalities with you